The following program is a presentation of Spokane Public Schools.
It is a building made of more than just brick and steel, wood and concrete. Its walls are made of memories, its halls of local history. In Spokane, Washington, Lewis and Clark is much more than just a high school. It is a crucible and a foundation for the future. Here, there is history in the making. This is the story of Lewis and Clark.
We're the first school, and we've always been here right on this site. This school is built right on top of the one that was here before, and our roots go a long way back.
The roots of Lewis and Clark can be traced back to the schools that preceded it on the same location. The wood-framed Central School first opened at 4th and Stevens in 1883 to students of all grade levels. In 1890, the schoolhouse was moved to make way for construction of the city's first true high school. Christened Spokane High School, it was built at a cost of $110,000 and had 47 rooms when classes began in 1891. As the city's population increased, so did the need for another high school to handle the growing population north of the river. When North Central High School was built in 1908, Spokane High was then renamed South Central High School. But South Central would never fulfill its promise. In June 1910, a spectacular fire roared through the structure, leaving only its charred walls.
Fortunately, school was out for the summer, but they had a major problem facing them in the fall. You cannot build a high school again by September, and so you have to think about what can we do with all these students who need to go to high school.
The ambitious but practical solution was to combine the student body of South Central with that of the newly built North Central High School. Classes would be taught in split shifts.
Juniors and seniors of both high schools would go in the morning, and the freshmen and sophomore would go to school in the afternoon. But certainly it was an inconvenience for everybody, parents, children, sports activities, everything taking place.
Spokane citizens passed a $500,000 bond initiative to pay for the design and construction of a new school. An up-and-coming local architect, Lauren L. Rand, was given the job.
Rand decided he wanted to build something quite different and something that would really stand out as a landmark, something that really hadn't been done in Spokane before.
The new school would literally rise from the ashes of South Central, bigger and better than before. It would cover almost an entire city block, and it would be Rand's masterpiece. The school was built in a collegiate Gothic architectural style that incorporated extensive ornamental flourishes into its massive structure.
When the high school was built in 1911, it was probably the most modern building west of the Mississippi River.
There was a public contest to name the new school. The principal of North Central suggested naming one of the two high schools Lewis and the other Clark after the famous explorers. The school district rejected that idea and instead chose the name Lewis and Clark for the new high school. In 1911, former President Theodore Roosevelt was in Spokane for a whirlwind series of public appearances. On short notice, he was driven to a hurriedly arranged cornerstone laying ceremony at the school's construction site.
There's a long-time legend that has surfaced repeatedly that when Teddy Roosevelt laid the cornerstone, he laid it backwards. But unfortunately, number one, he doesn't lay the cornerstone, it's already there, and what he does is sort of pat the top of it and maybe put a little mortar on it to make it look good with a trowel. And secondly, the cornerstone had not been engraved. There wasn't time. They only found out he was coming, asked him if he would do it, and he came. And so as far as we can tell from doing a lot of research, he did not have anything on the cornerstone.
The first principal of Lewis and Clark was Henry Hart. During his lengthy tenure, Hart relentlessly stressed academics as the top priority at the school. The main facade would become its trademark, and its front steps its focal point. Over the decades to follow, thousands of students would pose on the front steps for class pictures. Bill Anderson came to Lewis and Clark as a freshman in 1939 and was graduated in 1943. He returned to the school as a teacher and coach in 1950. 20 years later, Anderson became principal. He retired in 1980 after 10 years as LC's top Tiger.
Many generations of different families, the same families, come to this high school. I had kids in my classes that were third generation, and a lot of students in my classes that I went to school with, and that was a very strong part of the tradition.
Scott Jones and his extended family are a perfect example of that multi-generational LC tradition.
There are 5 generations of our family who have been involved at Lewis and Clark. It started with my great-grandmother Louise, who in the 1920s worked in the book room at Lewis and Clark. Her son Kennard, who's 94, was the second generation of our family involved at the school.
Scott's mom, Carol, and dad, Barry, class of 1951, along with his Aunt Judy and Uncle Denny, make up generation number 3. His brothers, Todd and Craig, along with Craig's wife Kathy and cousin Laura Lee, round up generation number 4. And Scott's son Brian checks in as generation number 5.
And it is special to think that we all walked down some of the same hallways and were in some of the same classrooms and got to experience a lot of the same feelings that only can happen at Lewis and Clark.
I think clearly the culture and the history of the building goes far beyond just the physical facilities. I think that there is a culture that goes with Lewis and Clark as the downtown high school.
The huge school and small surrounding campus took up an entire city block. But because of its downtown location, there was no room nearby for any kind of adjacent athletic fields. During the 1930s, the school district purchased a 52-acre property on the South Hill for $52,300.
There was a time that they had thought that they would demolish the school or sell the school and turn it into offices and move the school somewhere up closer to its playfield, but it never took place.
As that debate dragged on over the years, the physical condition of Lewis and Clark continued to deteriorate.
There were basic fundamental systems in the school that were taxed really to the limit of of what they were expected to do over their lifetime. Some of those, the basic water systems and electrical systems and light systems and sound, all of those really couldn't be patched up any more than what they had done.
When the freeway was built directly in front of the school in 1969, both noise pollution and exhaust fumes assaulted classrooms at the front of the building. What so often worked in the school's favor, its urban location, also worked against it.
The dilemma of Lewis and Clark and the choices that they were faced with are common really throughout the nation right now with our increased numbers of aging schools. And the choices were to keep Lewis and Clark on site and keep the school here, or to maybe sell it and adapt it for a new use, which is really quite common, or to demolish the school completely and move it closer, maybe out to the suburbs.
In 1995, with Lewis and Clark in need of major repairs and upgrades, a group of concerned parents formed a study committee that brought a new sense of urgency to the community at large.
And we studied dozens of locations within the Lewis and Clark High School district or area. None of them serve the community's needs and the students' needs as well as the present site.
Based on the study committee's recommendation, the school board placed a $75 million bond issue on the ballot for improvement of schools citywide in 1998, and Spokane voters overwhelmingly approved the initiative. Of that, $27 million was earmarked for the renovation of Lewis and Clark High School, with an additional $13 million provided by the state of Washington. The school, listed on the National Register of Historic Places, was about to get a $40 million facelift.
It ranks as probably one of the top 2 or 3 historic preservation projects in Spokane. And so we were really under the microscope with everything that we did on this particular project.
The Northwest Architectural Company of Spokane was awarded the contract to design the renovation and expansion project.
There were many constituencies that we had to satisfy. First of all, there was the educators, and then there was the audience of the historic preservationists, obviously, but there was the community at large that expected us to develop this as a civic asset, of course.
Now that the community had committed to renovate Lewis and Clark, another major dilemma quickly became apparent.
Well, I think, you know, obviously when you look at a project like this, the first question is, what are we going to do with 1,500 kids for 2 years while we're remodeling?
One thing that the staff told us right at the very beginning, and the students and the parents, is if you can keep the students together, please do so. Holly Mason provided that opportunity.
The Holly Mason building had served as a warehouse during the early 1900s. It was also listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but it had become abandoned and had fallen on hard times. The school district chose it as a temporary high school and committed to a 2-year lease. After that, Holly Mason would be available for high-tech commercial use.
I still think all of us were excited when we went in there because we knew what we were going to come back to. I think we all anticipated a tough couple years, and we found out that it wasn't too bad.
In the fall of 1999, while construction was underway up the street at Lewis and Clark, the entire student body moved a short distance north into its temporary facility at Holly Mason.
I believe parents, particularly incoming 8th graders, those parents were concerned on safety issues, security issues. We were, quote, right downtown, lots of traffic next to the community detox center, some issues there that they were worried about.
It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but somehow it worked. The hallways and stairwells were narrow. Some classrooms were cramped and many had pillars that made both teaching and learning inconvenient.
It was real small. The doorways were real small and kind of tough to get into, and with such a big school that we have, it was kind of tough. The stairwell was real cramped, but otherwise it worked pretty good.
I started here as a freshman, then after 1 year we moved on to Holly Mason, and then now we're back up at the new building. So I'll be a freshman 3 times, 3 different buildings.
We sacrificed a lot. It was totally worth it because it's so beautiful upstairs and down. It's awesome.
It took a team of architects and state-of-the-art technology to convert a turn-of-the-century school into a modern educational facility. But the plans for its renovation were not without controversy. Preliminary design concepts called for the need to replace the administration annex, a brick-clad building connected to the east side of the school. Built in 1908, the building originally housed the school district's administrative headquarters. It survived the fire of 1910 and eventually became an annex to the high school.
We went into this not anticipating tearing down the annex. What we discovered was that the annex was a rabbit warren of a building with pockets of space and tunnels and little catacombs all over the place that we could not use very efficiently for a contemporary educational program. When we began to look at it and compare what we could do by replacement, we discovered in the end that we could replace it with a new building that realized 2 additional classrooms over and above what we could have in the annex for $1.2 million less.
Some members of the community wanted the old administration annex preserved. Others said it needed to be replaced with more modern and instructionally functional classrooms.
The school district had a difficult decision to make. They had to listen to the needs of a lot of different people.
Oh, we listened a lot. We afforded them, we asked them to send in things to the newspaper, write us. We had forums out in the public, in the community that went on for a long time and asked everyone, please, if you had some perspective on this, please share with us. We felt that we made every effort that we could to listen to the community.
While the school board eventually decided to replace the annex with a new 4-story, 12-classroom addition, they enlisted ongoing input of members of the Spokane City-County Historic Landmarks Commission. The board also hired an architectural consultant specializing in historic preservation. to ensure that the renovation of the much-beloved school retained its numerous character-defining historic elements. In June of 1999, construction work officially got underway on the Lewis and Clark project. The first task was to demolish everything that stood on a square block of land directly east of the school. It would become the site of a brand new fieldhouse and parking garage. The new fieldhouse would be named after legendary LC basketball coach Squinty Hunter, replacing the original Hunter Fieldhouse on the west side of the campus and carrying on Hunter's legacy. The 65,000 square foot structure would house 2 gymnasiums with a seating capacity of 1,700 people. It would also contain locker rooms as well as orchestra, band, choir, health and fitness classrooms. Meanwhile, selective demolition work began on the interiors of the main school.
With respect to the original core building, our goal all along was just to preserve it in terms of its original integrity, its original materials, and overall appearance. We researched old color poster cards, every old archive photographs, everything that we could come up with to ensure that we were redirecting it down the right path.
Construction began on the top floor of the 4-story building and would eventually work its way down. Everything about the interior of the school was completely reworked. Throughout the school, hallways were rebuilt. The original and temperamental electrical wiring was removed and replaced with modern components. A high-energy new power plant was put in, and a new ventilation system was installed.
But essentially what you had in the old days was a single boiler pipe and a single return pipe. We've replaced that with 4 pipes of a heating and cooling system. We've replaced that with the cable tray for telecommunications cables. There must be miles and miles of that cable in there. We've replaced that with altogether new power systems, with a life safety fire protection sprinkler system. The infrastructure in there is just incredible if you can peel it away and look at it.
The school's foundation was literally rock solid. That proved to be a problem for the design team.
Lewis and Clark High School is built on solid basalt. And as we tried to put sewer and water and electrical lines underneath the basement floor, we found some very hard rock. And that slowed us down a little bit.
The school's centerpiece had always been its auditorium, but it had seen more than its share of cosmetic changes over the years.
The original stage was only 16 foot deep. They found out very quickly that that didn't work, and in the 20s the stage was expanded, but it was not expanded in a way that it really blended in with the existing Gothic design in the auditorium.
Archival photographs showed us that it was originally a neoclassical auditorium with a lot of ornamental plaster and features that you would find in Renaissance quality buildings.
When I was here in 1943, they covered all the windows because of World War II.
And the windows had stayed that way since then.
It was a dark, lugubrious auditorium before we started.
From an architectural standpoint, the only way to renovate the auditorium and restore it to its original glory was to take it apart and start over again from scratch. To do that, parts of the roof were removed so that construction crews could get the access they needed. What they found surprised them.
Well, the Presidium Arch is the opening where the stage and the curtains are. The cartouche is the symbol that is above that. The original cartouche that was on the original stage, covered up in the early 20s, was way up in the flylofts of the where all the rigging was, and nobody had ever seen it. We brought it out and put it on the new Presidium Arch and restored it to a position that it hadn't seen for 70 years.
Finally, after all of the interior renovations were completed, the original seats were removed, refinished, and reinstalled, complemented by seat cushions that had been fashioned in a turn-of-the-century style. Overall, the difference was like night and day. The jewel of Lewis and Clark was shining again.
There is no doubt that the new auditorium is a centerpiece of what's occurred at this building. And when you walk into there, literally you're awestruck.
As construction work continued inside other parts of the building, a much-needed and long overdue cleanup project got underway outside. All of the brick, stucco, and terracotta faces were washed and chemically cleaned, removing decades of dust and dirt. The next major step was to surgically remove the administration annex building and build the new addition of classrooms and stairways that would go in its place. The addition was designed to be a logical extension of the main building. It would face east, directly across Stevens Street from the new Fieldhouse. The two structures would be connected by a stylish glass and steel sky bridge.
The architects did a beautiful job on the designing of the sky bridge. They went back and looked at the early 1900s when the building was built at some of the other structures that were in the downtown area and found that the railroad bridges had that unique design, and so they used that design for the transition from the old building to the new.
The new sky bridge was more than just an umbilical cord between buildings. It connected the past and the present. The school did have a sky bridge at an earlier point in its history. It was built in the 1960s over Howard Street, connecting the west side of the school with the original Squinty Hunter Fieldhouse. That gym, along with the connecting sky bridge, was torn down to make way for a new campus open green space. Not every piece of the administration annex building was lost to the wrecking ball. As part of the series of compromises that the school district made with local preservationists, architects kept the building's front facade and door framework intact and moved it to a prominent area at the school's northeast corner.
It would have been nice to save the annex, but I felt the more important issue was saving Lewis and Clark High School and seeing it renovated so that those of us who attended there years ago could walk through the building and still feel a part of the school that we had attended when we were there or my father attended.
Next, the stairwells. Over the years, thousands of students had traipsed up and down these stairs on their way to and from class.
They were kind of social gathering spaces for the kids, and so they were very important to the character and quality of the school. However, the problem was fundamentally that they amounted to a smoke chimney in a fire setting.
But with the building's redesign, according to code and fire regulations, the architects couldn't keep all of them open.
We felt that we had to kind of compromise that system a little bit and in the favor of life safety and find different vertical pathways that were more reliable and enclosed up and down out of the school. However, in the front, flanking the front entry of the school, we said that at the grand entry to the auditorium, on either side, let's keep those stairways and let's have them spiral up to the third floor so there's some taste of what the original character and quality was.
Renovating and repairing hundreds of the school's windows was also a major concern.
The old ones were original, and they were shaky and they were noisy, and everything, heat and cold and sound came all around them.
One of the challenges was to try to save as much of the interior wood window sashes and original wood frames as possible. But workers found that most of the windows had been treated with a lead-based varnish, which had to be removed before contractors were able to refinish and reinstall them. Specially created windows were the final piece of the preservation puzzle.
The operable sashes have been replaced with a monumental window that is manufactured precisely for historic preservation.
Throughout the classrooms, most of the original wood floors were found to be salvageable, and they were refinished. New terrazzo tile was used in hallways throughout the building. The library was almost tripled in size to 7,500 square feet and moved to the basement. The basement cafeteria was eliminated and replaced by food serving stations on the other floors. In many cases, most of the school's original shelves and cabinets were cleaned, refinished, and brought back into the school. Skylights that had been covered up during the 1940s were uncovered, allowing natural light to flow back into the building. And while an army of construction workers was busy throughout the school, one young man was busy on a renovation project of his own.
I guess I'm the Clockman, the LC Clockman.
David Cohen was an LC student during the 1990s, and he always enjoyed tinkering with the old clock atop the school, trying to get it to work.
Hopefully I can be the first to get this thing to run again.
Over the years, the LC clock tower had become an icon. But the clock itself hadn't worked reliably since the 1920s, and as a dedicated alumnus, David really wanted to bring it back to life.
It's been a lot of fun, just occasionally working off and on this thing, trying to get this piece to work, that piece machined, this thing in working order, that thing repaired. And it'd be nice to have this old piece still part of the new LC.
Now an attorney in Seattle, he came back free of charge to try to get the clock, his clock, working again.
There's new and there's old, and I'm working on things that were the turn of last century, and the new kids are coming into the high school, it's the turn of this century, and I think there's quality in both of them.
One former student's personal crusade to master time became almost synonymous with the Lewis and Clark renovation project itself. Both were trying to somehow magically turn back the hands of time while looking towards the future.
To me, and that's where it really hits us, I stand in front of there on those stairs and look up there a lot, and it just gives you goosebumps. You just feel like you're part of so many things.
When everything was said and done at Lewis and Clark, the school had become transformed. The final product was nothing less than a civic miracle.
The restoration and refurbishment of Lewis and Clark High School, this magnificent, historic structure and figure in our community, is very important to our continued efforts to revitalize the core of our city, the heart of the region.
It's a fantastic urban planning success story.
When I walk in, I say, wow, we did this right.
There was a real sense of electricity in the air when the public was invited to tour the finished product during a grand reopening ceremony in August 2001. And on the first day of school, the students and teachers of Lewis and Clark finally had the place to themselves. In the grand scheme of life in Spokane, everything was suddenly right again. Lewis and Clark had survived its greatest challenge, and it had won. Its promise had been kept. Plenty of history had been made here over the years, and the path was now clear for it to be made once again. This was and will be history in the making.
If you would like to obtain your very own copy of this special program, contact the Communications Department of Spokane Public Schools at 509-354-7340.